All right, so next hand. Negreanu raises to 18K on the button with Jack 3 of hearts, which is probably fine. Ras calls small blind with King Jack. This is something we've been seeing a lot more of in these hand histories, is small blind electing to just call. And rarely 3-betting. And they're doing this because if you 3-bet and get jammed on, it's a bit of a disaster. But you can call, and then you can check call in a lot of spots on the flop. That said, I think 3-betting may still just be better. The problem with this is that if you 3-bet this hand and get jammed on, you're often getting very close to the right price to call. And when you're getting close to the right price to call, well, you have to be calling. You don't really want to 3-bet hands that are going to leave you in a very near break-even spot. That's why I had this problem with this Dan Smith hand right here that we had earlier, where he 3-bet with ace-jack of diamonds, and I think he was probably going to fold if he got jammed on. And I didn't like that because he's going to be getting very close to the right price to call. And you typically want to avoid those spots where you're getting very close to the right price to call. You'd much rather just call in those spots instead and see the flop. Unless you think you have a huge amount of fold equity, which sometimes you do, right? If your opponent's just going to fold too often pre-flop, then maybe that happens. All right. Flop comes King, Jack, 6. Check, check. Very easy check for Negreanu with his marginal made hand. We teach this over at pokercoaching.com. This is just ABC Poker. Marginal made hands need to be checked. Some of your junk needs to be checked, and some of your super nut hands need to be checked. Right here, that's just going to be pocket kings. Ras does not need to lead with his 2-pair. If he leads on this board too often, he is going to be really exploitable because this board should typically be better for Negreanu than Ras. That said, given Ras is calling from the medium or short stack from the small blind, this may actually be a spot where he does have a slight range advantage if Negreanu's opening way too wide pre-flop. So I think a lot of people just get in their heads, okay, big cards are better for the pre-flop raiser. But that's not true if the pre-flop raiser is raising way too loose for whatever reason. And right here, way too loose is, I guess, a term you should use for what a big stack should do on the bubble, right? Or near the bubble. All right, so check, check on the flop anyway. Very, very standard check. Turn queen of spades, Ras bets. 30 into 52. I might bet bigger here. This is something else I've been working on a lot. If you play around with the GTO programs, they will very often say that you should bet bigger in these spots when the flop goes check, check. Because now, whatever your opponent has plenty of equity. And when you bet 30K, you're often giving them very close to the right price to call. And also in the spot, they are going to call a lot. So I would not hate a bet of like 70K or at least 50K. You're going to also find that these bets, I think, at the moment, carry a lot of fold equity, a little bit more than they should. Like I'm thinking back to my 25K the other day. I had this spot come up a lot of the time. Basically, when the board does not bring a card higher than the top pair, that's the spot where usually the opponent's quite capped, and you can blast it. So you'll pick up these pots a lot. You want to be betting in this spot with lots of draws and lots of good hands. This is not the best board for it. You'd rather be something like Jack 7, 3, 4, right? Where whatever your opponent has is still marginal. Here, the opponent could easily have ace 10 or queen jack, right? So you have to be a little bit more careful on this board. But clearly, Ras is not concerned with being careful because he has 2-pair. All right, so he bets, gets called. River's an ace of spades, which is just atrociously bad for Ras. So easy check for him. Negreanu bets 100K. So, should Negreanu bluff? And I think the answer is yes. He has definitely a hand that's near the bottom of his range. You'd rather have some spade in your hand. Like if he had the jack of spades in his hand, I think this would be a no-brainer bluff. With no spades, it's still probably just fine to bluff. There's spots like this where you have a hand that's near the bottom of your range with no blockers that sometimes you do need to give up if you have any showdown value whatsoever. But really, if you think about what Ras has when he bets the turn, Negreanu's not going to have any showdown value because Ras is either going to have some sort of strong 1-pair hand or 2-pair hand, or he's going to have an ace that got there on the river, or he's going to have a 10 that got there on the river, or he's going to have a front door flush draw that missed. And a lot of that range should be a king or a queen or maybe a jack. So if it's a lot of king or queen or jack, I think you probably need to bluff. So he bluffs. Now, should Rast call? You got to win about 33%. So what hands is Negreanu going to value bet on the river? Well, first things first, will he bet with a straight? Obviously, he's betting a flush. Will he bet with a straight? I think he probably will, right? So now, Negreanu has all sorts of 10s in his range because he's even going to check back the flop with stuff like 10-9 some portion of the time, just giving up. And he ends up rivering a straight, and he's obviously going to value bet it. So here, Negreanu has a whole lot of straights and a few flushes. In order to be protected in this spot, though, if Rast is going to check this hand, he also needs to check a lot of his straights. So Rast has to be very careful that he is not value betting all of his best hands on the river to the point that this is the top of his range. I think what a lot of people do is they always bet the river in Rast's shoes with straights and better. So if he's betting straights and better, well, all of a sudden this hand becomes one of the best hands in Rast's range. And if this is one of the best hands in Rast's range, he has a very easy call. So if you know you're betting the river with straights and better, I think you have a very mandatory call with this hand. If you're not betting straights and better, then, like you say, you're just checking every time, then you can justify folding this hand because now you have straights and maybe even a flush or two. So let's see. Would it be better for Rast to blocking bet the river sometimes? I think it could be reasonable. The problem here is that when you blocking bet the river, from a GTO point of view, you're basically saying that I'm betting with mostly marginal made hands and then about 10% nut hands and about 5% bluffs. That is what, if you're good, your blocking bet should look like. 10% nuts, 5% bluffs, 85% marginal made hands that can win sometimes on the river. So, does this hand fit in that category? I think it definitely does. Problem is, does he have some nuts? I think he probably has some nuts. And does he have some bluffs? Where are his bluffs? This is what you want to be asking yourself, right? If you think about the bluffs in Rast's range, the only bluffs that make any sense right here are backdoor diamond draws that missed. I'm sorry, front door diamond draws that missed, right? Notice that you don't want to bluff with an ace. You don't want to bluff with a 10. So he has to have like 9-8 of diamonds or 9-7 of diamonds or 8-7 of diamonds. You see what I'm saying? There's only like 5 or 6 combinations of bluffs, right? So there's only 5 or 6 combinations of bluffs. You probably want to put those in your big bet range instead. So given Rast has very few bluffs, I guess that's a reason to bet small with the whole range. And I guess that would make some sense. The problem is that if you're betting small with your whole range on the river, or very near your whole range on the river, now you're not getting full value out of your best hands, right? So you have to have some bluffs in your big bet size. That's just very well known. So maybe what you're supposed to do here is you're supposed to bet big with your nuts, like flushes, maybe some of your 10s, then either check or bet tiny with your 10s and king jacks and whatnot. That's probably what you're supposed to do. Maybe bet tiny with those hands and then bluff with like one combination of a backdoor diamond draw. Memleak says that king jack blocks sets, etc., etc. Negreanu has more bluffs you think. Well, that's not what we're discussing right now. We're trying to figure out what should Rast do. Rast has to act first. I mentioned this yesterday, but when going through these hand histories, if someone's action is not listed, it means they checked. And Rast was in the small blind, so he has to go first. So Rast checks the river. We're discussing Rast action, which is not written here. I get why that's confusing. But now on the river, once he checks, and Negreanu bets, we've decided if Rast should call this or not. Well, what does Rast want to have in his hand to justify calling? Well, he wants to block flushes. You can't block straights. So you want to have a spade in your hand, if possible. And he does. Notice he has the jack of spades. That's actually a good spade to have, because now it makes it way less likely Negreanu has a flush. And you also want to have hands that block sets that may be value betting. Negreanu has this, and he blocks those sets. So this is actually a pretty good hand to call the bluff with. You also don't want to have diamonds, because diamonds are a hand that Negreanu would likely want to bluff on the river, but I'm not sure Negreanu has a whole lot of diamonds because he checked back on the flop, right? So maybe that's not such a big deal. So I guess you just want to block straights, which is impossible, and then next you want to block flushes. So I think this is probably a call on the river. When we count combinations, can we do it in Equilab? I don't even know if you can count combinations in Equilab. Is that a thing? I always use the float the turn range analyzer. I guess this counts them to some extent. It doesn't really break it down well. I tell you what, I guess I'll just pull up the float the turn range analyzer for future use. Let me pull it up here. And that'll work. So anyway, maybe we'll use this in the future. We'll see. Basically what it amounts to on the river. We're not going to do this. I just went through all this. We'll do it next time, maybe. Okay. I think this may be a call on the river, though. Let's see. Call. If you don't have straights and flushes in your range, though, I definitely think it's a pretty easy call. All right, next hand. Let's see. What down Negreanu bet size should Rast call with his two pairs out of position? I think he should call 100K. So given I think he should call 100K, I think it needs to be even bigger. As Negreanu bets smaller, though, Rast should call more, right? So, like, where is the line? I don't know. Rast needs to call with about half of his hands on the river. So go through his range, find the top half, find the ones that have blockers to the flush, and you will have solved the problem. All right. I think it's very important that when you are thinking about poker is that you don't think of it as, oh, what should this person do here? You need to think of it more as, I have a problem presented to me. Now I have to go solve the problem. And you can do that just by knowing the answer from playing a ton and studying a ton, or you can use various programs to solve it. Like when we were trying to determine earlier, like what should you do when your opponent makes a kind of weird turn lead? Well, continue with 66% of your range based on the bet size, right? And that's it. And I didn't have to go look up what a 66% range look like, because even though I've never been in that spot or rarely am in that spot, I haven't studied that spot, I already know what that range looks like, right? So once you play a lot, you eventually just know what rough ranges look like. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be very close to right. And if you're making very close to right plays almost all the time on a regular basis, that's going to work out pretty well for you. All right, here we have Tilston raising 20K in the low jack with queen 9 offsuit. Very, very loose, but he's the big stack, so it's probably fine. Rast 3-bets the cutoff with ace king. Notice he does make it big and gets the fold. I think this big 3-bet is perfectly fine. As you're playing shallower, you want to be 3-betting a little bit larger so that if your opponent does play, they're either shoving or folding. And if your range is just mostly value heavy, that's going to work out pretty well for you. And you even could bluff sometimes. It's not a big deal. Like say Rast decided to 3-bet here with a few bluffs, like ace X, it's fine. When you are picking your bluff hands in this spot where you think you're not going to get called very often, why don't you in the chat tell me what you would 3-bet with? Linear or polarized? Which one's better if you think they're either going to be 4-betting or folding? Type it in the chat. I'm gonna go get some water. Okay, we're back. If you think your opponents are going to be folding or 4-betting, you want to 3-bet with a polarized range. So, what I mean by a polarized range? Well, conveniently, this is a polarized range. What Brian Rast should probably do in this spot is 3-bet with all of his best hands. Maybe something like this. Yeah, maybe something like this for value. And then some bluffs. Now, next question. What are our bluffs? Which are the hands we want to be 3-bet bluffing with, right? Well, we want to 3-bet bluff with the hands that we know we have to fold to a shove, but also block a lot of our opponent's shoving range. So what hands block our opponent's shoving range? Well, I guess the first question is, do you want to have a calling range? In this spot, facing a 2.5 big blind raise, we're in the cutoff. We probably do want to have a calling range here. Let's get out of the range analyzer. This will make life easier. 3-bet polar. So we already have 3-bet for value. We 3-bet these hands, we get it all in. Then we have a calling range of maybe something like this. Maybe not. Maybe we call these. And then we want to 3-bet as a bluff with the hands that block our opponent's shoving range. So what is he going to be shoving with when we 3-bet? Well, mostly hands containing an ace or a king. So we want to bluff with hands containing an ace or a king. Ideally, you want to do it with the best ones because sometimes you get called, right? So that's going to be a range like this, then a range like this. Notice this has us, can you see this? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You can't. We'll just move this over here. All right, this has us 3-betting with 34% for value, 30% as a bluff. As you get shorter, you need these two numbers to get closer to 50-50, but at this point, I don't think we're quite so short to where we cannot justify having a few more bluffs. So I'd probably find another bluff or two in this spot, and it's probably just queen jack offsuit. Usually queen jack offsuit's fine. Maybe ace 9 offsuit's fine. A lot of people always think, oh, just go for ace 5 suited, but that's not necessary. You'd rather block ace 9, or you'd rather block pocket 9s than pocket 5s, right? Because pocket 9s may shove, whereas pocket 5s is not. So this is going to be a reasonable strategy for Brian Rast in this situation. So what did he do? He had ace king, he 3-bet, and the opponent folded. And that's fine. But that's going to be roughly a strategy he's going to want to use. This program is, again, the float the turn range analyzer. We go through it on, we use this on all of the poker coaching homework webinars where I present you a situation and you have to tell me using this chart what you do with your whole range. This was an easy one. Sometimes they get really, really nasty. Finch says that Brian Rast looks tilty with that 3-bet. All right, very important to note. These players probably assume each other plays very, very well. Brian Rast has done some crazy stuff in his life, and I can almost guarantee you he is going to be very near immune to tilt at the poker table. When I know someone looks tilty, maybe because they've lost the previous 7 hands and they've had to rebuy 6 times, if I know they're good and I have respect for them, any tilt that they are appearing to have is a facade. If I am ever acting annoyed at the poker table, you can be very guaranteed I'm not actually on tilt. Because I realize it doesn't matter, right? You're going to lose sometimes, and that's okay. I mean, Brian Rast does all these prop bets where he fights people who are bigger than him, and he rides a bicycle from LA to Vegas in 2 days straight and stuff like this. I mean, the guy has like perfect mental fortitude. May not make the best decisions to start with, but has very strong mental fortitude once he's doing something. And I've played with Rast a pretty good amount, and he's just a strong player. I remember one time I played with him at Bellagio, and on the river, I just had like the nuts every time, and I went raise flop, bet turn, bet river. Every time he ended up folding the river, and he was just fine, you know? He's just a good player. And that's going to be the case with all of these players, really. They're not bad is what it amounts to. You got to realize you don't get to play 25Ks or 50K tournaments like this one by being bad. You get here by not tilting, by playing well. And that's why we're looking at these players to try to figure out what are they doing that perhaps I'm not doing. A few things I have determined, they are so far using even smaller bets than I'm using. Smaller bets are very, very, very good. They are 3-betting a little bit bigger than I used to be, but now I'm starting to do a little bit bigger 3-bets as well, so that's fine. They're also taking lots of spots where they have obvious bluff hands that maybe I was giving up in the past, like that Negreanu hand a second ago. That's the spot where maybe I would just check, maybe a year ago, fearing, the guy's obviously good enough to check his straights and flushes, so I can't just bluff like a maniac. But I think a lot of these players are going for good bluff spots, especially on the turn in the river that perhaps I was passing up on. So anyway, we're finding spots, right? And if you can model it, like if you told me you could take my poker mind away and give me Schindler's or Marchese's, sign me up. I would take either of their poker brains immediately, and I'd be better off. So we are trying to model ourselves after players who are better than us and figure out what they're doing that we are not. If you have an ego and think you're the best, you're not going to be the best. All right. Here we have another hand. Ras raises 20K in the hijack with ace-jack offsuit. And here we have Schindler 3-betting one of these hands. Let's see. Was this in the... Oh, I deleted the... Oh, no, I didn't delete the range. Where is it? So many tabs open. Is this in this 3-betting range? Ace-2 suited? Hey, there it is. How about that? That's good, right? You'll find that at the end of the day, you may not realize it, but you have a strategy for every single spot. Your strategy may be 3-bet the ace-2 suited 38% of the time and fold it the other times, but you do have a strategy for every single spot outlined in your brain. It gets changed from time to time, but if you had to make a chart just like this for every single spot that comes up in poker, you have that. You just don't know what it is. And if you can figure out what your opponents are doing and know what their strategy is, that's going to be very beneficial. If you can think about your strategy for spots that you're likely to encounter, where maybe you have a little hole in your game, right? Like let's say in this spot, you don't 3-bet these hands. Let's just say you don't do it, right? You don't 3-bet these 4 hands right over here. You just fold them instead. Well, now all of a sudden we have way too many value hands. And that's a problem. We have a giant hole in our game of when we 3-bet, our range is too strong. And that's a problem. So you want to look at every single spot and try to solve for it. Luckily, pre-flop's easy. Most people figure out pre-flop pretty quickly in their careers. It may take me, 2 or 3 years. But if you're working hard on that, it's not so hard. What gets really hard is turn and river scenarios because they don't come up very often at all. And ranges often get broken down slightly incorrectly, and then you end up with, too many bluffs in one spot or too many value bets in one spot, whatever. All right, anyway, here we have it. Schindler 3-bets button with ace-2 suited. Rast calls. So I don't exactly know this scenario, but I think if I was playing here against Schindler, I would be all in pre-flop. And the reason I would be all in pre-flop is because I know Schindler likes to use his big stacks on the bubble. I played one really fun hand against him once. We were on the bubble of a 10K tournament, 10K 6-handed at the World Series, and someone raised another big stack. I called on the button. I think I had ace 10 of diamonds. Someone else called. Schindler 3-bet to like 35% of his stack or 40% of his stack. So it must have been like 2.5 big blinds. I called, he called, somebody else called. Schindler made it like 13 big blinds or 15 big blinds out of 45. First guy folds, and I'm just like, everything in my brain screaming, obviously all in, Schindler's going to fold a lot. So I go all in, gets back to Schindler. He just like annoyingly mucks. It was so good. That bubble lasted forever. It was really, really fun. Then I got bad beated by Frank Casella, who always bad beats me to death. So it's, yeah, fun games. We did get in the money though, so that's good. Let's see. So yeah, knowing Schindler, that he likes to 3-bet a lot, I would be all in this spot with the ace-jack offsuit. Mainly for protection. Obviously, whenever you get called, it's bad. But Schindler's going to over-realize his equity in position, and you're going to under-realize out of position. So I think I would just be all in for this 320K. I get you're near the bubble, but you can't just sit there and get 3-bet all day. Calling's also dicey, again, because you're going to under-realize. All right, flop comes king, 7-3. Schindler continuation bets tiny, which is good, because he should have a range advantage here. And Rast calls. So, dicey spot to call, but hey, remember what we were just talking about, right? If we're trying to be close to GTO, Schindler needs to steal this pot about, well, I'll show you how to do it. You take the 40,000 bet. You take the 40,000 bet and divide it by what the pot's going to be after his bet. So 40 divided by 180 equals 22%. So you do -1 equals. Ras needs to defend about 78% of his range. You think Ace-Jack is in the top 78% of Ras range? Probably. So, probably has to call. That said, again, Ras is going to under-realize his equity because he's out of position against a strong range. This is very, very important. Ras is out of position against a strong range. So, given he's going to under-realize his equity, he should fold more than the minimum defense frequency, which is something a lot of people don't get. They start to get into GTO strategy and they think, okay, always defend minimum defense frequency. And that is not correct. If you're going to under-realize your equity, you should fold more often than minimum defense frequency. So this one is going to be a call for sure, but if he had like Ace-5 of hearts or something, somehow, or who knows what other hands he could have, like say he had Queen-Jack, these are all hands you would probably just want to fold. All right, turn is a 7. Horrible, horrible card for... That's not right. I guess it's not that bad. It's normally bad. I guess it's not so bad. Both players go check, though. Pretty easy check. River King. Kind of interesting that Ras decides to bet this. There are 2 pairs on the board, kings and sevens. I would not initially think that I like this bet because you're always getting called when you're beat. But I guess if you make an ace fold, that's not so bad. The way this works is if your opponent has an ace, they're putting in 130 to win 110 when you are, value bet / bluffing this hand. When you're bluffing this hand, basically. So that's fine. I think if I was in Ras shoes, I would probably check, though. And the reason I would check is because, again, I know that Schindler enjoys bluffing, right? If we know Schindler enjoys bluffing, maybe he just likes bluffing me. I don't know. Given I know Schindler enjoys bluffing, I would check the river and then look to check call. I would be very unhappy with the check call. But I think when you lead, Ras is going to call often enough to where it's not going to work out so well for you. Also, also Schindler could very easily have a pair. It's not like we can just discount all the pairs, right? If there was some reason we could discount all the pairs, or like, let's say the board was king, queen, 3, turn, queen, river, king, then yeah, sure. I could see leading in that spot because then you're not worried about the pairs anymore. However, in that scenario, though, there's a lot of pairs that can bluff, right? So for that reason, I don't really know what's going on here. I should probably just take a note on this and say, don't know. All right. We have lots of questions from people. Say we 3-bet like we say ace-2 suited 38% of the time. How do we know if we should be in the 38% or not? Are we counting how many times we've done it over our career, et cetera, et cetera? All right. Online, you can use some sort of a random number generator. I typically don't worry about it so much. I don't think you need to be precise unless you're playing super, super high stakes. You can look at the second hand on a watch and just know which portion of your watch means what. I did a webinar with Olivier Bousquet, and he said that every day, again, not trying to worry about being too precise, because you don't know 38% in this spot or 36% in the next spot. You just know it's like sometimes, right? Like a third. What Olivier said he does is that every day he'll pick a suit, like say the hearts, right? And if the suit on the right-hand side of the board, I think is what it is, either the board or one of his cards, if this, let's say the suit on the right is a heart, well, that means that this is the 25% of the time for any 25% spot that comes up or something like that. He also says, or maybe it was like if the first card in his hand is a heart, he goes for it or something like this. So that is, that's a way you could also do it. I typically try to shy in the direction that I think makes most logical sense in this spot. Like, say I'm in a spot where I know a call is very near break even. If my opponent's been really tight or tighter than normal, even if I think they're just a good player, I'm probably going to be more inclined to fold if I don't think they're going to be like getting overly aggressive in these spots. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not so precise with that. Let's see. But yes, in live it's tougher. Oh, and you even said it. So you talked about the suit in your hand, and that gets you closer. Yeah, yeah. Or just use the second hand on your clock. What does Sinler's 3-bet range look like? I don't know. In this spot, well, I had initially pulled up this one. This range has him, if he's doing this, he's 3-betting about 10% or 11%. He's probably 3-betting wider than this, though, if I had to guess. He's probably running as many bluffs as he possibly can, maybe even with some of these junky hands like these. So I don't know, it's probably like 15-ish%. You said you wouldn't be surprised if it's 40% of hands. I think that's probably way too loose. Do you know what 40% of hands looks like, Ghost of M? I'm just going to take this slider and make it look like 40%. This is 40%. Let's clean this up a little bit to make it look reasonable. This is what 40% looks like. This is pretty insane. If you're 3-betting this spot with a medium stack, by the way, it's not even the deep stack. There are two deeper stacks here, Negreanu and Tilston. I would be pretty surprised if he is really getting after it. Do we need to balance our cocktail waitress hotness range, though? The problem with that is that other people can see the cocktail waitresses. You want to ideally try to do it with things that they don't necessarily know you're looking at.